All right, let's dive into something kind of paradoxical, shall we? Ayn Rand, the champion of individualism, well, she once said she'd never vote for a woman for president.
Yeah, it's one of those things that makes you go, huh, really?
Yeah,
Especially when you think about her books, right?
exactly. The strong female characters, leaders, even.
It's like, wait a minute, is there something we're missing here?
Totally. So, where do we even begin to unpack this?
Well, I think the key here, and this is what makes it so fascinating, is that this kind of contradictory stance really highlights a tension at the heart of Rand's philosophy.
Okay, I'm listening.
To really get it, we got to go beyond just the surface level.
Hmm.
We got to dig into how her ideas about gender roles, relationships, all of that ties in with her political views.
Gotcha. So, what are we working with here, source wise?
Our main source for this deep dive is actually an excerpt. It's from a larger text where she really lays out this whole argument.
So, mission wise, we're not here to judge, right?
Exactly. We're not saying she's right or wrong.
It's more about trying to understand the why behind her reasoning.
Yeah, what were those underlying principles that led her to this conclusion? And what can we learn from all of this, even if at the end of the day, we end up disagreeing with her stance?
Makes sense. So where do we start? I mean, with her views on gender roles, I guess. It was the mid-20th century when she was writing.
Right, a time when women were really starting to, push those boundaries, break free from those traditional roles.
So did she embrace those changes? Or was she more like holding on to those traditional ideas?
That's a really great question. And it's tricky because while Rand did challenge a lot of the conventions of her time,
Uh-huh.
her perspective on gender roles, it was definitely more on the traditional side. She was convinced that men and women had these like distinct psychological A and D biological differences, and that these differences really influenced how they interacted with each other and what roles they took on in society.
Hmm. But isn't that kind of, I don't know, problematic to say that a woman president would disrupt this whole dynamic, even if she thought it was natural?
Absolutely.
Doesn't that, like, limit a woman's potential? I mean, it seems to go against the whole idea of individual achievement, which she was all about.
You're right. It does seem like a contradiction. And that's exactly the kind of critical thinking that, this deep dive is meant to spark. We can't just take her words at face value. To really understand where she's coming from, I think we need to go back to one of the kind of foundational concepts in her philosophy,
Okay, which is,
objectivism.
Hmm.
She believed in this very, very specific form of meritocracy. Like, individuals should be judged solely on their abilities, their achievements, no other factors.
oh wait, isn't that what we're talking about? Like, judging someone based on their gender instead of their merit.
Well, here's the catch. For Rand, merit. It wasn't just about being competent.
Okay.
It was very deeply intertwined with her specific moral values. And that's where things get complicated and where I think that conflict comes into play.
All right, I'm starting to see where you're going with this. But how do her views on gender roles actually fit into all of this?
So Rand saw men's nature as, well, geared towards leadership, creation, action, qualities she saw as super essential for achieving, individualistic happiness. And women, well, she argued they were naturally more inclined toward admiration for these qualities, that they found fulfillment in supporting and celebrating men's achievements. It's like, think about Howard Rourke and Dominique Sanson.
Oh, from the Fountainhead. Right. I see where you're going with this.
Yeah, Rourke, he's that uncompromising architect.
He totally embodies that individualistic drive.
Exactly. And then you have Dominique, a strong woman in her own right,
Yeah.
but she's captivated by his, his strength and his creative genius.
Okay, so I'm starting to see how this kind of romantic ideal, that dynamic, connects back to her views on leadership.
And that leads us to her belief that a female president would disrupt that whole dynamic
Oh, yeah.
because, she'd be occupying that high position of power. And essentially for Rand, the presidency, it was inherently masculine. It symbolized that ultimate expression of, those leadership qualities that she attributed to men.
Hmm. I mean, I get it, but I'm also seeing, like, the potential blind spot here, you know?
Yeah.
It's almost like she's prioritizing a specific type of romantic relationship over the potential for any individual, man or woman, to achieve great things.
That's a very sharp observation. And it brings us right to one of the main criticisms leveled against Rand, that this view, it kind of directly contradicts her meritocratic ideal.
Right. It doesn't add up. If individual achievement is supposed to be above all else, how can you also say you'd never vote for someone based purely on their gender?
It does seem like her personal beliefs might be, I don't know, clashing with her own philosophical principles.
For sure. What do you think?
It's definitely a major point of contention. And while she didn't go so far as to say there should be laws against women holding office, her statement, I think, reveals a potential inconsistency in her thinking.
Okay, yeah, I see that.
And this inconsistency becomes even more glaring, I think, when we consider some of her strong female characters, like Dagny Taggart, for example.
Oh, from Atlas Shrugged. She's amazing.
Right? Brilliant, independent. I mean, she's arguably the driving force behind, like, everything that happens in that book.
So how do we reconcile these empowering female characters with her statement about not voting for a woman for president? It's like
Yeah.
whiplash.
Yeah, and that's where things get really interesting. It's almost like, well, almost like Rand is wrestling with these ideas herself,
Yeah.
both in her philosophical writing, AAD, in her fiction. On the one hand, you've got this championing of individual merit, celebrating these strong women. And then on the other hand, there's this personal resistance to a woman in that ultimate position of power.
Wow. This tension between her ideals and her personal beliefs, it raises so many questions.
Definitely. Like, did she ever talk about how her views might evolve as society changed?
Right. Or did she ever consider that a female president could embody both strength and, those qualities she associated with femininity?
Exactly. Because remember, she was writing at a time when the whole idea of a female president was basically hypothetical. And the world has changed so much since then.
It makes you wonder. I mean, if Ayn Rand were alive today, seeing women leading countries, running these huge companies, would she still hold on to those same views?
It's hard to say for sure. She was so committed to her principles, that whole system of thought.
Right.
But at the same time, she was also a very keen observer of human nature and how society shifts.
So maybe.
It's entirely possible that seeing women leaders succeed might have caused her to, I don't know, reevaluate some of her assumptions.
Maybe. Or maybe seeing those women excel in roles she thought of as masculine would have just, reinforced her belief that men and women are fundamentally different.
Yeah, that's really astute, actually. It shows just how complex this all is when you're trying to understand someone like Ayn Rand. You can take those core ideas and apply them in ways that could lead to very different conclusions.
Which, in a way, I guess proves how powerful ideas really are.
Exactly.
They're not static, right? They're meant to be debated, challenged, and ultimately, I think, to help us navigate a world that's constantly changing.
Absolutely. And
Right.
that's what makes this whole deep dive so valuable. It's not about saying, okay, here's the answer, Rand was right or Rand was wrong. It's about engaging with her ideas, wrestling with those complexities, and, using them as a starting point for our own critical thinking.
Because, love her or hate her, you can't deny that Ayn Rand was a force to be reckoned with.
Right.
I mean, her ideas still spark passionate discussions, even today. And I think that, in itself, is a sign of how relevant they still are.
Absolutely. It speaks to the power of engaging with thinkers who challenge us.
Yeah.
The ones who make us uncomfortable, who force us to look at the world in a totally different way, even if, in the end, we don't agree with them.
Yeah, because it's not about becoming a Rand follower or a Rand hater. It's about becoming a more thoughtful person, someone who can engage with complex ideas and form their own opinions.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And it's important to remember that even within objectivism, there's a whole spectrum of interpretation. Not every Rand scholar, every enthusiast is going to agree on every single point. There's room for nuance, for debate, even within a framework that at first glance can seem very black and white.
So what does that mean for us, for the listeners, trying to make sense of all this?
It means that engaging with thinkers like Ayn Rand, even when their views kind of make you go, whoa, hold on, it could be incredibly valuable. It forces us to examine our own beliefs, to question our own assumptions.
Yeah, to see things from different perspectives.
Right, and to maybe deepen our understanding of the things that shape our world.
Because even if we totally reject her conclusions, going through that process, wrestling with her ideas, it can make us sharper thinkers. It can make us more aware of the nuances, the complexities that we might miss if we just jump to judgment.
Couldn't have said it better myself. And at the end of the day, that's what real learning is all about, right? It's not about memorizing facts or blindly accepting someone else's view of the world. It's about actively engaging with ideas, questioning everything, and constantly refining our own understanding of how things work.
So to kind of wrap up this part of our exploration of Ayn Rand and her, shall we say, interesting take on women and the presidency, let's remember. This conversation isn't over. We've unpacked her reasoning, looked at the historical context, and wrestled with some of the contradictions and complexities that make her ideas so fascinating and, well, so enduring.
Yeah, we've only just scratched the surface.
Right. So in part 2, we're going to dive even deeper. We'll look at some of the modern criticisms of Rand's views explore how her ideas have been embraced and rejected by different groups, and even consider how her philosophy might be interpreted in today's world.
It's going to be good. Stay tuned because
Well,
this deep dive is far from over.
we've got a lot more to uncover.
So, yeah, picking up where we left off, it's pretty clear that Ayn Rand's views on gender roles and leadership, well, they still get people talking, you know? They
Yeah.
definitely challenge the way we usually think about things.
For sure. And especially as we move further into the 21st century, it's really fascinating to see how her ideas, especially that whole statement about not voting for a woman for president, how they resonate in a world where women are leading countries.
Yeah.
They're running these massive corporations and achieving incredible things in every field you can imagine.
It's true. I think one of those interesting things about Rand's work is that it's been, well, embraced by so many different groups, reinterpreted even, sometimes in ways that I think would probably surprise her.
It's like her ideas have kind of taken on a life of their own,
Yeah,
evolving and adapting as the world changes around them.
exactly. And this brings us to, well, the modern criticisms of Rand's stance on women and leadership.
Right, because
Which-
obviously,
A lot of contemporary thinkers, especially I think in feminist circles, they see her views as, well, flawed at best, and even, harmful.
I can see that. I mean, if you're fighting for equality and trying to break down those traditional gender roles, then Rand's whole emphasis on these inherent differences between men and women, especially when it comes to leadership, it's going to raise some eyebrows for sure.
Oh, absolutely. Critics argue that her views basically perpetuate these harmful stereotypes and that they limit women's potential. It's like saying, well, they're just not naturally cut out for positions of power. And they point out that even her concept of admiration, which she presents as this natural, fulfilling thing, it can actually reinforce those patriarchal structures
Yeah,
where, men are the ones in charge
yeah.
and women are kind of relegated to those supporting roles.
Right. It's interesting, though, because Rand herself was a fiercely independent woman. I mean, she achieved incredible success in a field dominated by men.
Right.
So how do her critics square that with her seemingly traditional views on gender?
That is a question that has sparked a lot of debate. And some argue that her own experiences as a woman navigating this very patriarchal society, it might have actually shaped her views. Maybe it led her to believe that, true individual achievement for women, it could only happen within the context of a very specific type of relationship.
With a man, you mean?
Exactly. Which, obviously from a modern feminist perspective, it's problematic.
Yeah.
But it's a perspective that highlights how important it is to consider the historical context. When we're engaging with an enemy thinker, their ideas, it doesn't excuse those potentially harmful aspects of their philosophy, but it helps us understand the complexities of their worldview.
Right, to see where they're coming from, even if we don't ultimately agree.
Exactly. So the question then becomes, how do we reconcile those criticisms with the fact that Rand's work still resonates with so many people today? I mean, a lot of women included.
That is a good question, because clearly something about her ideas is appealing to them.
Yeah, and for a lot of people, I think that appeal lies in her fierce commitment to individual liberty, her celebration of, human potential, and her complete rejection of anything collectivist. It's like her emphasis on reason, self-reliance, the pursuit of personal happiness, that transcends gender for a lot of her readers. And it continues to offer, I think, a really compelling alternative to what they see as these stifling societal norms.
So even though there are flaws, you're saying her work can still be a source of valuable insights, that it can spark important conversations about individualism, freedom, the role of government, all that.
Absolutely. And that's what I love about engaging with complex thinkers like Ayn Rand. They make us think critically.
Yeah.
They force us to question our own assumptions and to recognize that even those ideas we might initially disagree with, they might contain some nuggets of wisdom.
Yeah.
Or maybe just offer a new perspective on beliefs we've held for a long time.
It's almost like she's throwing down a gauntlet, right? This philosophical challenge. Come on, grapple with these tough questions. Figure out what you believe.
And that's exactly what we're trying to do with this deep dive, right?
Yeah.
We're not here to give you the answers or tell you what to think about Ayn Rand. We're inviting you to come along with us on this exploration, to wrestle with those complexities, and to ultimately, come to your own understanding of her work and what it means in the 21st century.
It's like a journey of self-discovery almost, not just about Ayn Rand and her ideas, but about our own beliefs.
Yeah.
And how they're shaped by the world around us.
I love that. And sometimes the most valuable discoveries are the ones that push us out of our comfort zones.
Yeah.
the ones that make us confront those uncomfortable truths and maybe even help us to see the world and our place in it in a whole new light.
Speaking of uncomfortable truths, Rand's whole statement about not voting for a woman for president, it seems especially, I don't know, jarring when you think about the political landscape today.
It really does.
Yeah.
And it makes you wonder, how her views might have changed if she were alive today. Seeing all these women in leadership positions around the world.
It's like, would she have softened her stance at all, acknowledging those achievements?
Mm-hmm.
Or would she have doubled down, argued that these women are just exceptions to the rule, maybe even reinforcing her belief that men and women are just fundamentally different?
It's a fascinating thought experiment. And I think it speaks to, the lasting power of Rand's work.
Mm-hmm.
Her ideas, even the ones that are the most controversial, they still spark debate. They force us to wrestle with these really big questions about, gender, power, individual achievement. What does it all mean?
So where do we go from here? We've explored her reasoning, looked at the historical context, delved into the criticisms. What's like the next layer of this deep dive?
Well, we've spent a lot of time focusing on Rand's own words and the reactions they've provoked. But I think it's just as important to consider those broader implications of her ideas, especially her concept of egoism and how it's been interpreted and applied in all these different contexts.
That's a good point. I mean, egoism, that can be such a loaded term.
Right.
People think of it as selfish, disregard for others, all that.
Exactly. So how is what Rand meant by egoism different from that common understanding? And how has it influenced all these discussions about individualism, morality, the role of government? Those are great questions. And that's the kind of nuanced exploration we're going to be getting into next. We'll break down those core principles of Rand's egoism, and we'll distinguish it from, those negative connotations.
Mm-hmm.
And then we'll examine how it's been used, both to champion individual liberty, but also sometimes to justify some pretty self-serving behavior.
Ooh, this is getting interesting. Sounds like we're about to step into some ethically charged territory.
You got it. We're going to explore that fine line between individual freedom and, responsibility to others.
Which I have to say seems like a line that's become more and more blurred in our world today.
So true.
We celebrate individualism, but sometimes it feels like empathy and social responsibility, they get lost in the shuffle.
Yeah. And that brings up another big question. How do we reconcile Rand's emphasis on individual achievement and self-interest with that need for compassion, for cooperation, community? Are those values fundamentally opposed to each other, or can they coexist?
So that's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
And it's one we're going to be wrestling with as we continue our deep dive.
All right, so let's dig into this whole egoism thing. It's a concept that I think can be easily misunderstood, especially these days, It's so easy to think of it as like pure selfishness, greed, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, you're not wrong. Egoism definitely gets a bad rap. But if we want to understand where Rand was coming from, we got to kind of separate it from that caricature.
Right, like the Gordon Gekko type.
Exactly. That whole greed is good mentality. That's not what Rand was talking about. For her, egoism was about, I think, recognizing the inherent value of the individual and then prioritizing their rational self-interest. That was for her the guiding principle for ethical action.
Okay, I'm following you so far. But how does that actually work in real life? Does it mean we should just focus on ourselves all the time and ignore everyone else?
Not exactly. Rand's point was that pursuing our own rational self-interest, in the end, actually creates a more fulfilling, more productive society. It's not about being ruthless, it's about recognizing that each person has these unique talents, aspirations, and that pursuing those things in a way that's both rational and ethical benefits not only the individual, but the whole community.
Okay, that makes sense. It's definitely more nuanced than just every man for himself.
Exactly. It's not about stepping on everyone else to get to the top. It's more about, I guess, maximizing your own potential in a way that also contributes to the greater good.
I like that. So how does this all connect back to, those criticisms we talked about earlier, especially the ones about her views on gender roles?
Well, that's where it gets tricky. Some would say that this whole focus on individual achievement, on rational self-interest, while it can be empowering, it can also lead to a disregard for those social structures, those inequalities that might prevent certain groups from achieving their full potential.
So, if you're so laser focused on your own goals, you might miss the bigger picture.
Exactly. You might not see those systemic issues that are holding others back.
I see. It's like there's this tension, right, between individual freedom and social responsibility.
Right. And some would say that's I guess, the fundamental problem with Rand's philosophy, that emphasis on individualism leads to a kind of, well, a neglect of social justice issues,
Hmm.
that it dismisses collective action as a way to make positive change. Because if you're just focused on individual achievement, you might not see the need to address, I don't know, poverty, discrimination, climate change, all those things that require people to work together to solve.
Yeah, that makes sense. So it's not really about whether or not we agree with everything Rand said. It's about recognizing that her philosophy, like Ayn philosophy, has strengths and any weaknesses. And that grappling with those complexities can actually help us, well, to understand the world a little bit better.
I completely agree. And it's important to remember, Rand was writing in a particular time and place, shaped by her own experiences, the
Yeah.
political climate of that era. Her ideas, as controversial as they can be, they offer, I think, a really valuable lens to look at those big debates we're still having today.
Mm.
Individualism versus collectivism,
Right.
personal freedom versus social responsibility, the role of government. It's all connected.
It's crazy to think how a statement like, I would never vote for a woman for president, something that seems so simple on the surface, can actually open up this whole Pandora's box of philosophical questions, and ethical considerations. It's like, whoa.
It's true. And that's the mark of a thinker who really gets you thinking, even if you disagree with them. It's that challenge to examine your own beliefs, consider different perspectives, and, well, engage in that dialogue about the values that shape our world. It's important stuff.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into, well, Ayn Rand's pretty controversial statement, what can we take away from all of this? What can we leave our listeners with?
I think the most important takeaway is this. Approach Rand's work, and any challenging thinker for that matter, with an open mind. Be critical, yes, but be open.
Don't just dismiss her outright.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And recognize that her ideas, even if they seem very black and white, are open to interpretation. And they can be applied in so many different ways.
So it's not about becoming like a Rand follower or a Rand hater. It's about using her work as a tool, a way to grow intellectually, challenge her assumptions, see the contradictions, and then, you decide what you think, what's valuable, what's relevant in the 21st century.
I love that. And don't stop there. Seek out other perspectives, talk to people, keep refining your own understanding of these things. It's a lifelong process, really.
Because ultimately, I think what we're trying to do with these deep dives is, well, it's not about giving you all the answers. It's about sparking that curiosity, encouraging you to think for yourselves, and giving you the tools to, navigate this world of ideas with more confidence.
Well said. And remember, the exploration doesn't end here. There's a whole universe of ideas out there just waiting to be discovered.
So keep those minds curious, keep those perspectives open, and keep on diving deep.
I love it.
We'll be right here with you, exploring the world of ideas, one fascinating topic at a time. Until next time.